Welcome to the Top Order Podcast. It's IPL week again here on the Top Order Podcast. We're going to talk hundreds, Rajasthan's epic collapse, the playoff picture with a week to go, and Stu's got a T20 rules proposal as well. We'll talk a little bit of New Zealand cricket, Dave White stepping down, Jofra's contract offer from the Mumbai Indians, the ICC revenue model, and a little bit of county championship as well. All coming up on the Top Order Podcast. Stay tuned. Well, boys, good paper shuffling again this week. We've all got the sort of newsreader motions going on. IPL really, we say it every week, but kind of hotting up with most of the teams 2 games to go in the tournament. Rajasthan Royals just have the one, CSK and KKR, as well as the Gujarat Titans. I think have only got 1 game to go. Gujarat sitting top of the table, 18 points, 13 played. In the tournament so far. And then we go all the way down to Punjab Kings, 12 games and 12 points. And pretty much everybody's still in the mix, bar the Sunrisers and bar the Delhi Caps, you'd have to say.
Yeah, I think Sunrisers officially kind of knocked out last night, I think, weren't they?
So I guess where do we want to start? Because there's a lot going on. Mumbai maybe pacing their run towards the playoffs pretty well. Rajasthan just dropping off. LSG look pretty well placed. They've got that 1 point, I guess, advantage, sitting at 13 points off their 12 games with a bunch of teams all on 12. Ben Stokes is going to go home before the end of the tournament. Joe Root's had 3 games now, just 1 at bat. So, yeah, lots and lots to talk about. But where do we want to start? Probably the hundreds, I think.
I think so. I mean, as an opening question, you guys, is it staggering? Like, I'm still staggered that T20 hundreds is so easy, I guess. It seems for these guys. Like, honestly, we had Friday morning, Jaiswal, I'm going to count that as 100, 98 not out.
That's not 100.
Typical bowler.
Yeah, he was going to get there. You know, they even tried bowling wides at the end to try and stop him from getting there. Sunday morning, New Zealand time, Sky does his 100. You know, he's been in incredible form. Sunday morning, then we have Prabhsimran Singh gets 100 against DC. And then again last night, we've got Shubman Gill getting 100. So, 400s in 5 days or 6 days here in New Zealand. I mean, like, same question again. Is this a surprise?
When we say it's a surprise, I think the players have perfected the tempo required to score that 20-20 100. You know, that 60 ball 100 is kind of becoming the norm. But then you see some stuff like what Jaiswal was doing. Yeah. What did he get 50 off? What
13 balls,
50 off 13 balls. Incredible
fastest. I think it was the fastest IPL 50 ever. At least
it was a 14 ball one. I think Pat Cummins actually held it.
I remember that.
Somebody else.
Years ago. Yeah.
And he got 5 buzzers in that as well, didn't he? So there was one, I think it was Andre Russell maybe fielding and threw the ball in, I think, from extra cover or mid-off and ricocheted off the stumps for 5, which kind of helped him along the way. The run scoring has been probably a theme a little bit of this week. Mumbai Indians, I said to you guys on the Slack channel, they chased down 200 with 4 overs to spare.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that was Sky's 80, wasn't it? 80-odd off 30-odd balls. I mean, yeah, like I said, he's been in unbelievable form, but... Yeah, I just find it amazing. And, like, I mean, you guys were talking around these hundreds that are scoring. Prabhsimran Singh, I think he had 27 off 31 balls. And then he goes 75 off his next 30. So it's all that stuff that we were talking about with Kohli last week and with KL Rahul. And, you know, we've talked about it with Williamson in the past where these guys get going. I don't think it was really, like, the plan for Prabhsimran Singh. He actually looked to be struggling a bit in that innings. But then just went boom. And once they take off, so many players now, once they take off, it's just impossible to stop them.
It feels like that, doesn't it? I mean, we talked about this Michael said that you shouldn't get 41 off 2 overs and how wrong he's been proven yet again on the Top Order podcast. But, I mean...
Won't be the last time.
No, it won't be the last time. Has not the first time. The problem, I think we're getting close to an imbalance between bat and ball. Like, if bowlers can't stop players from hitting the ball pretty much wherever they want, there's something going on in terms of the balance between bat and ball, whether it's size of ground or state of wicket or state of ball, or maybe just the bowlers not being able to, like, counter batters being able to access both sides of the wicket like they haven't been able to in the past, you know, with reverses and such. There is something I think that we need to maybe just be aware of and start thinking about. Is there something that we need to do here with the balance of bat and ball, whether it's the ball allow it to get older so that it's not as hard and it doesn't, go as far or swings more or something. I think there's something in there that,
But this is by design, right? Like, as a governing body, you want 220 plays, 221. Big ratings, big revenue.
Yeah. Maybe we don't, but I think they do.
Yeah, but I think so.
And
But
is there anything wrong with that?
but at what point does it become the home run derby at the All-Star weekend in baseball, right? Like, it's just that's basically what a 220 or 240 game is. It's just the home run derby. Like,
But isn't that what T20 cricket's supposed to be?
I think there's got to be something in it for a bowler. Something in it for a bowler. If there's nothing in it for a bowler at all, and all you're doing is just lobbing up, something to be hit out of the park, that's not going to get young kids wanting to bowl, right?
I don't disagree with the premise, but I think we've got to look at the fact there's a couple of bowlers, in fact, more than a couple of bowlers that are at, the top end of that wickets chart, going at under 8s and over.
Yep, absolutely.
Shami, Rashid, I think have both got 23 wickets at under 8 and over in the tournament. I think the other factor that's probably come into this IPL as well is if we look back at the last couple, which we know partly COVID affected, they had to play on the same wickets over and over again throughout the course of the tournament. So I think they've probably played on more fresh decks, which, normally would be then more batting friendly. It certainly seems to have spun a little bit less over the course of this tournament. So, maybe that's one of the things is to bring a bit of that jeopardy into it as well.
The thing that bothers me about modern cricket now, not is the skill of the player.
You sound quite old there.
I'm prepared
Back in
to be.
my day.
I'm prepared to be old. What I don't like is that fielding and bowling teams are not rewarded now for a batter making a mistake. A batter can make a serious error in terms of judgment or of line and length or the shot that they need to play and still hit the ball for 4 or 6 in the modern game. That, to me, needs redressing. It's not so much whether or not the batsman is good enough to hit the ball out of the stand if they get it right. But if they get it wrong, there should be some serious jeopardy as to whether or not they get caught on the boundary or in the infield. At the moment, that doesn't happen. You don't have to look very far to look at, like, edges being chunked and going for 6 over the back of the keeper's head, or a ball that in, like, the 80s and 90s would be caught on the boundary or caught just outside the infield, goes way over the infield, goes for 4 or 6. I think that's the thing that needs to be redressed in terms of the balance between
we can't control the size of the grounds really too much. They can maybe bring them in a little bit, but not much given, all the paraphernalia now that needs to be between the fences and the playing surface. So we're really left with the cricket ball and the bat and potentially the surface as the three things.
So those are the 3 things. Other sports have dealt with it. Golf and tennis have dealt with it by changing the size of the ball to greater or lesser controversy. Javelin has dealt with it multiple times by changing the shape of the javelin. The world record in javelin got up to 120 metres. They were throwing it out of the stadium. They changed the width of the javelin to make it less aerodynamic.
More dangerous, though, than cricket.
Far more dangerous,
I wasn't expecting javelin chat on today's show, but that's good.
But that's where we've landed. I think there needs to be some redress between bat and ball, and maybe it's only in T20 cricket where it seems to be the biggest issue.
But do you feel that if we don't see a game that's 170 plays 170, for example, we have kind of not wasted our time, but we've lost a little. Like, for example, when Rajasthan were bowled out for 50 odd, like that's like, I've watched that game, I've scrolled through, blah, 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 and then it's kind of like, oh, well, the game was over very, very quickly. Like, isn't that something that you feel like you've lost?
No, because it's only one game. In fairness, if all games were like that and the average T20 score was closer to 120 than 180, then absolutely. Hard watch. Very difficult to watch. There is nothing worse than a dour 190 plays 195-50 over game of cricket. Like that, nobody wants to see that. But that's too far in the other direction. You know what I mean? There is a balance, and I just don't think that the balance is right, and I think it's largely to do with batsmen getting away with far too many mistakes.
You mentioned the bats and the balls. I reckon that came out wrong. I reckon the pitches have a lot.
I would agree.
I think if I think back to the early 2000s or late 90s, a lot of those pitches had a little bit in them. They had some green in them. They were a little bit uneven, or stuff like that.
And maybe it is that this is an Indian Premier League conversation. Flat batting friendly wickets. I think we only need to rewind to the World Cup. World Cup final at the MCG. it nipped around almost all the way through. There was, 3 or 4. I mean, I think Shaheen Shah Afridi bowled a spell where he went past the outside edge about 77 times in his 24 balls, and it was nipping.
Hell
all
of a
over.
feat to do that, by the way.
Absolutely. And so I think there's a little bit of this is a one country, and the pitches are going to be a little bit like that. When we have maybe the Big Bash, it's going to be a little bit different in terms of a little bit of nibble potentially.
Yeah, I
It's
feel
been
like
exciting though.
it has been
Yes,
exciting.
it has. To be fair, it has been super exciting.
It has been exciting, and let's go to that in a second. But since you teased it before, and we're talking about tactics and the balance of things, the idea that I haven't thrown out to any of you guys, so to try and solve, because I had a similar thought about some of that stuff, and actually it was more around the fact that T20 cricket is such a tactical game that I think maybe you just go all in on those tactics, and I think that the fielding restrictions could change in T20 cricket as well, in that you have your power plays in the same way that you're supposed to select them in a one-dayer. Why can't you just do that in a T20, and we have scenarios where teams are not having their power plays at the start of the innings for the bowlers, say, and that way you could have batters coming in where they've actually got to make a tactical decision. Do I get myself in for 5 or 6 overs and then try and use the power play? As a bowling team, you're seeing that Rajasthan game, for example. They didn't play Trent Boult in that game.
Yeah.
They picked Adam Zampa and then they bowled all their spinners all in the power play. Maybe you're going, okay, well, we'll pick Trent Boult, we'll bowl him, we won't use our power play, we'll give him some cover, we'll try and use the swing, we'll try and take a couple of wickets, get Kohli and Faf out, and then we'll put the power play on when the batters are
I don't mind that.
in that scenario.
I don't mind that.
I feel like that could have some way of actually giving the bowling team some opportunity to influence the game a bit more.
Tremendously successful, Raj, as you know, in social cricket, the selection of the power play.
Yes, but that has to do with the
Quality of the fifth bowling option, would you
but
say?
it also increases the runs or halves or doubles the runs
Yes,
or
that's
halves the
true.
runs. Not necessarily a fielding thing. You mentioned when the power players, but these teams are scoring 220, 230. They're going the whole
that's
innings.
true.
And I think also has an impact on the end of the game or the end of the innings as well, particularly now. We've seen it only happen a few times in the tournament, but there has been teams getting to the buzzer and having to have only 4 out in the last couple of overs. So I think, again, whatever you do in terms of a rule change around that kind of stuff has potentially unintended consequences as well. And I think the other thing is it just makes the game even more complicated to watch potentially for the casual fan in terms of what's going on here. And okay, you can explain it, but I think there's a simplicity about it being up front. I think that that you're going to see hell for leather, as Raj said, they're going from the start anyway.
First 6 overs,
yeah. But you're seeing that hell for leather in the first 6 overs.
I think it's something we come back to at the end of the IPL. This might be a flash in the pan, and this might just be a one-off tournament where the scoring average rises and we go back to something resembling what we've known in the past next year. But I think it's worth keeping an eye on for sure.
You mentioned Mumbai before. Sky. I mean, why don't we talk about Sky? Because honestly, I think we sort of joked about him. I think that was maybe at the start of the IPL when he'd gone through that terrible run of form. And
He wasn't out of form though, Stuart.
No, well, he wasn't out of form because he hadn't had enough.
He hadn't had enough balls to get out of form.
He's certainly back in form now.
Yeah.
And honestly, that guy, I mean, there's some seriously, even as someone who supports the bowlers and wants the bowlers to be doing well, there's some seriously good watching in this IPL in terms of the quality of batters. I think the one that's been going around social media is the one that he, uses his wrists and gets it over third man for 6, basically, when it looks like he's trying to hit it over cover, but actually just manipulates the ball. And I mean, it's just remarkable cricket. And the fact that they can be a team where their bowling attack is terrible, right? On paper, at least. You've got Piyush Chawla, who's become really, really important for them, having an excellent season. Jason Behrendorff's become a really important bowler for them in the last couple of games. But, on paper, compared to the rest of the other sides, but it just doesn't matter. Because that guy's just so good, and Ishan Kishan's come back into some form, and they're just flying now.
Well, they've got a little bit of momentum. What are they, 4 out of their last 5?
4 out of the last 5, yeah.
4 out of the last 5. Then momentum is what you need in the IPL. I am excited to see Sky back. I think he was giving them a little bit of a handicap. He's 5th now on the run charts. Started from behind, but Mumbai have every chance to go very deep into this tournament.
Yeah.
Yeah, and look, I guess they play tonight, don't they? So they play against the Super Giants.
Yeah, that's
as
a big
opposed to the
game.
regular Giants.
Yeah.
And then they've got the Sunrisers in the penultimate game of the round robin stages. So look, it is just a fascinating sort of set of combinations. I don't think there's a massive amount of point in us going into those, other than to maybe talk about our predictions as we get a little bit deeper into the segment. But as we said, half the teams have got sort of 2 games to go. There's a handful that have just got the 1 to go. Rinku Singh has carried on. So we talked about him last week. I think he's gone back up the run charts a little bit more this week as well. Glenn Maxwell as well, 550s in the tournament.
Yep.
Baldy.
He's playing really well, Glenn Maxwell. I think he has been listening to the podcast, heard Raj talk him down and talk up Michael Bracewell, and he said, well, I'm having a piece of this. And he's actually done a really, really good job for RCB.
To be fair, Bracewell's bowled really well.
He has actually bowled really well, to be
It was
fair.
nice to get a Bracewell sighting, wasn't it?
It was, but...
Did they both play? They both played, right?
They
in
both
that game.
played
Yeah,
in that
nice.
game.
Hasaranga left out.
Yeah, and just if we do go to RCB, that's just been their problem the whole way through. I mean, you've got Coley, Faf, and Glenn Maxwell all in the top 10 batters with the impactful stat being used, all in the top 10, yet they are losing so many games because of how their bowling is going at the moment. They're just leaking runs. I mean, I know Sky is an exceptional talent, but chasing down 220 odd?
Yeah,
in 16
218
overs
or something like that. Yeah,
in 16 overs, that's unheard of. That's got to be something wrong with the execution from the bowlers there.
Yeah, I mean, I had the same thing down about Maxwell. Again, just outrageous cricket shots. The game last night, I mean, the night before, sorry, when he was just, he's batting left-handed, and when that stuff goes wrong, I remember in the T20 World Cup, I think it went wrong, and suddenly everyone was kind of mocking him and going, oh well, should be batting right-handed, and look what happens. But when he gets it right, it actually is impossible to bowl to. No matter where where the bowlers were putting it, he could just access every single part of the ground, and he's just smoking it. So yeah, just amazing stuff. I think you talked about impact. His strike rate's at 180 this season.
Much better than the international season he was having, it looks like. Just around the table now and going into the playoffs, do you think that Gujarat have an absolute advantage that pretty much everybody else, maybe CSK could drop a game, but pretty much everybody else has to win every game all the way through to the final from here to get to the playoffs and then to actually obviously win the thing?
Yeah, look, I think I'll probably have a bob each way on that one, because they're through. I think they can still technically only finish second. I think if all the results go, I think CSK's way, and they win their remaining. They've only got 1 game left actually, CSK, so they can't. Yeah. But I think Mumbai Indians can maybe match them.
They can go to 9. Yeah,
match them on points.
But the run rate is horrible though.
Yeah. So I just wonder whether or not Gujarat they can take the foot off the gas now, but they really want to keep that momentum going, because if Mumbai, for example, who are going pretty well, stay on that roll. CSK have started to probably come good as well, chopping and changing that sign round. You've really got Moeen Ali in for Ben Stokes, who's having a pretty good tournament, isn't he, Moeen Ali?
Stokes hasn't even featured. I mean, it's
from early in the tournament. I think he's available this week, but not selected. But yeah. I think my point with this is, Gujarat almost that they want to have a close game and a tune-up, whether and they don't play until the last game of the tournament now. So that the last game of the group stages is against the RCB, which, if you look at it, it's probably
RCB.
It's probably a dead rubber though, isn't it? I mean, obviously, if they win their game against the Sunrisers, then yes, of course.
Oh, for Gujarat it is.
Yeah. So I just wonder again whether they might want a bit more of a tune-up leading in, and having exhausted almost all their games, early in the tournament.
But they could scheduling's in my head might be all wrong, but Gujarat could lose their next 2 games and then win their next 2 games and win the tournament, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they're 9-4 now, and they'd finished 9-6 worst case. Only one other team, which is Mumbai, can finish with 9 wins. So they're, as Adam said, guaranteed top 2.
Whereas a lot of those teams have to win their next 4 games. Just 3. They have to win the next 3
on the bounce
to get to the final.
Yeah.
And then the 4th to win it.
Yeah. So this is a long tournament. Like we've joked about it, but it is a reasonably long tournament. Like, how important do you think rest is at this point for Gujarat, or the ability to say, well, we're only going to play I don't know, Hardik Pandya at 6, or we're not going to bowl Hardik in the last couple of games. We'll bowl somebody else, either to give them a run or to play with those kinds of things. Like, how do you guys feel about that? And then someone can come back to me at the end.
I'd really dislike doing this, but I'll have to agree with Adam that momentum is actually the key here. I think that if they should not be taking any foot off the gas pedal. They should be winning every game going forward, because momentum is everything.
And we saw that with CSK when they in the bubble, when they just came back from that half tournament or whatever, got on a roll and just won the tournament. Like it was as simple as that. They just got on a rhythm and kept going and kept going and kept and then won.
Where do we think this is going to end up? So, we did predictions at the start. We've done mid-tournament predictions. We've predicted stuff every week, and it changes, as often as our socks, I think. But where are we? Where are we going here? We're all, obviously Gujarat are a lock. They're definitely qualified. Where do we think the other 3 semi-finalists or final 4 are coming from in this playoff stage?
Well, I think tonight's massive, and then that people are going to listen to this podcast and probably know the result of LSG and Mumbai. But I think that's huge, and I think whoever wins that game is in, if you ask me, and the CSK is probably also in. And I guess going around in circles in this conversation, I think we've got to circle back to this epic collapse from Rajasthan, because I think a few weeks ago when we were talking, before things kind of got all bunched up again in the table, there were 4 teams that looked like they were out in the lead, and it looked really like this was almost over, and that Gujarat, Rajasthan, CSK, and LSG at that time, when KL Rahul and Mark Wood and stuff were still fit, they looked the 4 best teams easily. Everyone else was kind of beating each other a little bit, but those guys looked dominant. And now we've got a situation where Rajasthan has just gone on this epic collapse. Even the most recent game, you mentioned it before, when they get bowled out for 59.
Yeah.
They're just playing. I mean, honestly, like, what on earth are they doing? It was the most brain dead cricket you mentioned the run rates before as well, and how important all of that kind of stuff is. They completely just butchered their run rate by they get in a situation where they've got 10. Like, how do you get bowled out with 9 overs to go? It's unfathomable, and I just don't know how you get what are they? Honestly, what are they doing? I'm almost to the point of swearing up, because it's just that ridiculous.
Baseball, mate. You just come back tomorrow and it doesn't matter.
It's a quick death thing, right? Why drag it out? Why drag it out for 20 hours? Maybe for run rate. Maybe you should be grumpy about it. But yeah, quick death, good death.
I just thought it was so terrible, because they're in a tournament where they've got to be thinking, like you say, it's a long tournament. We've got to get every single advantage if we want to be winning this tournament. They go away, they blow that game and the no ball against the Sunrisers. Like, they're going to look back at this tournament. I don't think they make it from here. They're going to look back at this tournament and just think, what have we done here? How have we let this slip? We should be in that final.
Well, in order for them to make it, they can only finish on 7 wins, which means that sides like CSK, Mumbai, LSG, RCB are all going to have to drop at least 1, if not 2 games.
Well, even CSK is probably not. It's all that Mumbai, LSG, and RCB.
Yeah,
and then their
net run rate,
but their run rates are higher than the Rajasthan teams.
So. Yeah, epic collapse.
Oh, it's been terrible.
So Raj, I'm gonna come to you as my momentum barometer.
RCB.
You're my momentum barometer. Who would you want to be in terms of? We talked about Mumbai's momentum. We talked about where GT are and CSK. Where would you want to be in terms of dressing rooms right now for that final 4?
Right now, I would want to be Mumbai. I think they are in the box seat. They don't have to worry about any other results. They just have to win the games that are in front of them, and they have games that are definitely winnable from them. They've got Sunrisers and LSG. So definitely they should. If they win one of those, they're probably through. So yeah, I would want to be Mumbai.
And if they beat LSG, that knocks them down a peg as well.
Correct.
So they're beating it. That's a double points win.
Correct. And but
2 birds, 1 stone.
Something like that.
But I wouldn't mind sitting between Faf and Virat Kohli though in the dressing room.
Yeah.
Just as a side note.
Just being Finn Allen, basically.
Yeah, that's
just absorbing up their knowledge for hopefully for future use.
And boys, Baldy, Lippy, any sort of, I guess, contrary opinion to Raj's, or are we saying that really you want to be Mumbai or Gujarat at the moment?
Well, I've massively jinxed Rajasthan because I thought they were going to make the final, so I probably shouldn't say anything, Stu.
Oh, look, I actually still do think now that it's becoming fairly settled. I think there's still one spot available. I tend to agree that Mumbai will win at least one of their games remaining and kind of do enough to get into the playoffs, whether they win both of them and can sneak up to second or, in there nice and comfortably. But yeah, I think, Gujarat is obviously, and I think CSK is playing well enough to win. The two, we talked a lot about Conway, but we haven't talked really about some of the other bit part players well, they're not bit part players.
Dubé.
Not Dubé. No, the two Sri Lankans are the guys that I've just been loving watching lately. Patirana is just he's so much fun watching that guy. You never you sort of with Malinga you went, oh okay, this is a one of one, and now it's turned out it's not a one of one. He's doing it even more sidearm, and it's just fantastic to watch.
Just to follow up on your question there, so Mumbai are actually in a position where they can get ahead of CSK and somehow beat Gujarat in that qualifier and go straight through to the final.
Yeah.
They're in a position there where they can win 3 games and play the final.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's going to be a crackerjack last week, this week, isn't it, of the round robin stages, and then look, we'll come back and eat some humble pie next week when it's KKR, Punjab and Rajasthan that make it through. I know that's not mathematically possible before you comment in the social media. Let's move on from the IPL. Let's have a quick swish and then we'll come back and we'll talk some New Zealand cricket, some county championship and some other bits and pieces as well. Well, boys, we're back and we're going to talk a little bit of, I suppose, domestic cricket from around the world. So we will cover some New Zealand stuff. So I think from a New Zealand perspective, let's lead with that. CEO of New Zealand Cricket stepping down from his role, David White. So some reactions, to that as well. But Lippy, what have you made of that story breaking over the course of the last 3 or 4 days?
I don't know. It's not. I don't think it's necessarily a huge surprise. I think probably. I think he's been there 11 years now, and at various times, and the way certain things have been dealt with, probably a lot of people have not been huge fans of David White. But I think you can. It's hard to look back at his tenure and be terribly upset. I mean, if you read all the reports, basically when he took the job, New Zealand cricket was in pretty bad financial way, and then all reports are now that that's pretty stable. And then you look at the state of the performances on the board, at least from a men's point of view. The women's game has sort of fluctuated up and down, but the men's game, this last decade is the best decade we've had in terms of results and making finals of major tournaments, winning the World Test Championship. So, I think in that case, and even with probably the big hires, hiring Hessen, it was, people were not happy, but the call, he's ultimately the person responsible for the call of McCullum over Ross Taylor and all of that kind of stuff. He had to stand by all of that. And I think in hindsight, you look back and you think that that's a pretty good decision. And, then even, going on to hire Steady afterwards to Hessen, and that's followed on. And it's led to a long era of really strong performances for New Zealand. So I think his tenure there will be probably in history looked back on pretty well.
Do you read between the lines that they've not announced a successor? And normally in that kind of scenario, CEO, particularly with that much tenure stepping down, they've got a succession plan already in place. Do you think it's just not been finalised, or do you think this has come as a bit of a shock to New Zealand cricket?
I don't know. You guys probably have a better sense of employment scenarios than I do. Yeah.
Although it would be silly, right, not to have a succession plan in place. I'm sure they do, as any good administration would. But just to back up your comments, he's overseen the most prosperous time of New Zealand cricket. He as the lead administrator of the whole shebang. He's let those people breathe. Those people, the Hessens, the McCullums, the Steads, the Williamson, let them breathe and let them take control of where that men's team in particular has gone, and it's been an absolute success. So you can't take that away from him.
Looking to the future, New Zealand cricket has been wildly successful, particularly in the men's game, particularly in terms of reaching and winning finals over the last 10 years. Do you think that David White has set New Zealand cricket up for success in the future, in the next 10 years? There are things on the horizon like player contracts and a number of different potential, flies in the ointment, not just for New Zealand cricket, to be fair, but for every nation. How do you think New Zealand cricket is positioned now to go forward into the future under new leadership, whoever they might be? Have we set ourselves up for success as a cricketing nation, or are we still kind of riding the coattails of the World Test Championship, World Cup final kind of success?
I love when you use "we" for New Zealand. That makes me really happy. But I think that's yes, White has done all of this stuff in the past, and we've just talked about that. As you say, the appointments from here on are going to be fascinating because we've already seen Gavin Larson step down. There's, I think everyone is expecting Gary Stead to sort of not reapply for his position. I have no inside info on that. I have absolutely no idea. But though, if those three positions all change, head selector, CEO, and coach of the men's side, what they decide to do with that coaching setup is going to be fascinating. There's a lot of, like you say, a lot of player turnover and all of that kind of stuff. The Trent Boult situation, the Colin de Gronholm, Martin Guptill, all of this stuff. The next couple of years are going to be hugely, hugely important for how we transition out of this great era of success. And if we don't get this right, then maybe that will be the biggest criticism of this era, that they didn't set themselves up for success going forward.
It's an interesting question you ask because, the New Zealand, like a lot of teams around the world, are sort of hamstrung in what they can do in terms of the game by, the BCCI, the Australian Cricket Board, the ECB. Those are the guys, the power brokers that, hold the course for where cricket's going. And if you look back 20 years and go, what did cricket look like then? It's changed a lot in 20 years. And if you look ahead to the next 20 years, I think it's going to change even more. There's, change is only going to accelerate. So whoever comes into that role has to be able to do that. I mean, even David White, if you look at his, when he was originally, we took the job up to now, how different the game would be. Someone who has to come in will have to be able to, change and move with that.
Well, I think anyone who's gone through and led an organisation in sport through COVID, relatively successfully and can come out with, maybe not, I don't know the full details, but, a decent balance sheet. We'll talk a little bit about the proposed revenue model for 2024 to 2027 later in the pod. I think there's a legacy there for that administration that is beyond what's happened on the field as well. The grassroots game is in a pretty good state. I think Punch is well above its weight in terms of probably some of the interest, particularly in things like the Super Smash. It's really, really well received domestically over that Christmas and New Year period. So I think some real positives, I think, in terms of New Zealand cricket. You mentioned Trent Boult. Do you want to talk a little bit about his comments in the week as well?
I think the last thing on White that I'll say is that I'm fascinated to know who's making these appointments now. Like, there are, like we just said, there are huge decisions to be made, and when sort of all potentially 2 or 3 of these big roles are up for grabs, I mean, I'm sure he'll still be involved. I think Martin Sneddon's involved on the board and things like that. The board will be making decisions there, but there are some serious decisions to be made, and who moves us into that? David White, though, not parting comments because I think he's still around for a little bit longer, but did say he'd be very surprised if Trent Boult is not in the World Cup squad. So I think that probably has been one of the criticisms of the administration, I guess, New Zealand Cricket administration, in terms of the way that they've handled this contract situation with all of these guys, and they've never really. Everyone's been wondering, when is Trent Boult available? When is he not available? There was the big hoo-ha over the fact that he, was just down the road from the test in the Mount and wasn't, was there but didn't play, and they picked other guys, and the controversy around some of those other players and all of that stuff. But the fact, I in my head, I've never had any doubt that Boult was going to be in that World Cup squad if fit. I think it's really nice to hear it though from the administration, and when you hear Trent Boult talk, the alignment isn't quite there, is it? That Trent's not kind of saying, he talks moderately positively about the relationship between New Zealand cricket, but it's not like, I understand what they're doing in as many ways as.
It's got to be difficult for him though, because he's made that decision, hasn't he? So he can't really sort of assume that he's going to be in the squad. He's got to be relatively politically savvy in terms of what he says, because if they go a different way, from a media perspective, it could blow up and create a little bit of a shitstorm.
Yeah,
if he's not selected, which you don't want leading into a big tournament, do you?
difficult for him, but also difficult for guys like, I'm just using Henry Shipley as an example, right? Who's done the hard work, played, in a lot of players' stead who have been away, especially Trent Boult, who has stepped away a little bit. But then Trent Boult coming straight back into that. How do you reckon they feel? Is that something where we just have to go, oh, look, you have to suck it up. It's a world tournament, we're taking our best players. Or do you feel a little bad for them?
I don't especially feel bad for those players on the fringe. I think actually, yes, it is. They are the players that who you go to a world tournament, you want to pick your best players. I think all cricket sides should be aspiring to pick their best players at all times. And we've been somewhat critical of some sides like the West Indies in the past where they haven't been able to find a way to actually get their players on the pitch all at the same time. And I think if we look back to that Test series against England when they decided not to pick Trent, there was nothing riding on that World Test Championship for New Zealand. We were already out of it. If they were ever, there is a time coming, and it's not that far away when we don't have even a chance to pick Trent Boult, a chance to pick Neil Wagner, a chance to pick Tim Southee. So they need to find some players, and the only way you find out if players are good enough is by giving them the opportunities. So they had to do that, and that was a perfect time to do that. Trent Boult now saying in those comments, though, that he'd love to still play Test cricket, and I'm really interested to, again, see how they navigate that situation because we've got some pretty awesome Test series coming up, the ones that everyone kind of wants to see in the next couple of years, really, where I think we've got England here, we've got Australia here, we've got South Africa here as well. So, those are the sides that we always want to beat at home because we don't really necessarily get that many opportunities to play them. And again, if Trent Boult's available and not playing, then that'll be a shame.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to talk more World Cup, obviously, in the lead up to the tournament. So I'm sure lots and lots of column inches will be written about that over the course of the next little while. Certainly after the English summer is out of the way, I think that's going to be dominating the cricketing landscape through July and August, which we'll come on to, I think, broadly, I'm sure. A couple of other bits of housekeeping, I suppose. The soft signal is gone, which I don't think we need to spend too much time on. All pretty happy with that.
Can I ask what that means? Right, I was thinking about this on the bus today, and I was like, soft signal's gone, right? So they're going to have a discussion with the...
Was there anything that prompted it on the bus, or
No,
did the bell ring or something?
Saw someone out the window just diving.
Yeah, no, it was, News Talk ZB went to the headlines and it was on there. So they're going to have a discussion. I mean, do we revert back to the, the unwritten, or maybe it is written, the law of, the benefit of the doubt goes to the batsman, so they have to see that it's out? Or is the umpire going to go, mate, I'm pretty sure he caught that. Can you just double check it? And then that becomes the exact same thing.
That's a soft signal, isn't it?
Exactly. Does that become the exact same thing? He's just not going like this or like this. He's still going to give his opinion.
I guess we'll find out the first time, won't they, when they draw the TV and what happens?
I reckon we should just not talk about it.
Yeah, I agree. Let's move on swiftly. We were on the contract stuff. Why don't we talk about Jofra? Because, I don't want to get Baldy to go and get his, witch's hat on again, but...
No, definitely not. We got some listener feedback on that, actually.
Yeah. What, positive or negative?
Very.
Yes.
All the feedback that I get.
But it's exactly what we've been talking about.
He made his point, though.
He did make his point, and it was very well articulated point, and I think it...
I was talking about the point of the hat. Anyway, let's move on. Jofra Archer, you want to talk about the Mumbai offer?
Well, yeah, because I think everyone's been predicting this is going to be happening, right?
Can you tell me about it? I don't know anything about this.
Really?
No, I don't.
You've been listening to News Talk ZB, but apart from that,
they haven't been talking about Jofra.
Should have been scrolling through ESPN.
Talking about Mike Crispin's shoes, I think, for the last week or two.
The Hosk has not been talking about Jofra Archer.
Well, basically, it sounds like Mumbai Indians have offered... I don't think this is, from the horse's mouth, but it sounds like Mumbai Indians have offered Jofra Archer a long-term contract that'll basically mean that he is property of the Mumbai Indians. Contracted to the Mumbai Indians and will only be released for international matches. It'll be the reverse. So he'll have to get an NOC from the Mumbai Indians to play for England.
Which is what we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago.
Exactly, but I think it's come around a lot quicker than people were thinking. And I've seen people like Shane Watson and other sort of commentators in the cricket sphere sort of saying that exact thing, that everyone knew this was coming. All the boards, like you say, have been thinking about how are we going to combat this when this does happen. But here it is. And as soon as one of these players signs this deal, the whole can of worms is going to be exploding everywhere.
Yeah, so look, I absolutely agree. I think it will. I think Mumbai are probably that little bit ahead of potentially some other franchises in terms of they've got, I think, the MI Cape Town franchise, the US.
And they have a Middle East franchise. I want to say it's in the UAE.
Emirates. So I think they've probably got that infrastructure set up. And I think I was listening to an interview actually with Alex Stewart, who is still, I think, I'll get his title wrong, but essentially director of cricket at Surrey. And one of the things that he said was, you know, he thinks that there needs to be a recognising of the fact that when and he was talking about it obviously from a Surrey perspective, when a Jason Roy goes off and plays in a franchise tournament and he's contracted to Surrey, you know, at least they're paying a portion of his wages. When he pulls a hamstring, they're the guys that will rehab him, that will give him the medical facilities to get him back fit. They will give him some second 11 cricket to go and have a hit. They'll bring him into the T20 Blast side so he can find some form. They'll pay his wages, and then he'll then disappear off and play a combination of international and franchise cricket. And they said that a big part of that now needs to be that is, you know, that has to be then part of the way that these franchises are set up. They can't just essentially take a player when they're fit, put them on the, you know, a big stage, and then not play any part in that pastoral care and development. You know, he said, you know, why should one of my batting coaches get the sidearm out and throw to him rather than an up-and-coming Surrey player? And you know, he wasn't talking specifically about Jason Roy. It was it was an example. So I think we are going to see it, and I think you know, ultimately, as long as those franchises have got that infrastructure in place, I can't believe I'm about to say this. I actually don't have that much of a problem with it, as long as we have got that right, recognising that let me finish, that we've got the right international windows available to play the big series, and that you know, there is a mechanism in place to say that international players are released to play in those, you know, in those games. But I think if it means we lose bilateral cricket, I'm fine with that.
But even bilateral Test cricket?
No, because I think Test cricket is a look, and that's where this is a personal conversation, right? We are all Test cricket aficionados, I think, round the
Fans,
table.
Yep.
So look,
We can be aficionados.
You can. I'm not.
Fair enough.
You three can be. I'm not.
Okay.
I'm just a humble fan.
Okay. Fair enough.
Not even that humble, actually. But I know what you mean. Like,
I don't know where to go with that.
give it to me.
I'm going to give it to you.
Thank you.
And you can speak on the podcast as well.
Thank you.
If you two could keep interrupting each other, that'd make for riveting stuff.
As long as this isn't the beginning of the marginalisation of Test cricket, then this ultimately for the player, for players like Jofra Archer and Andre Russell, the super-duper stars of cricket, they will have access to earning potential, the likes of which belong to only rare footballers and baseballers and basketball players in the United States. Like that is the company that they will become part of effectively.
There's a big difference between those two players though, Baldy, in that one is still on an upward curve, probably in terms of international career, and one is a guy that isn't going to play too much.
You could argue
cricket.
that Joffre's not though. In terms of his injuries,
you could argue that he's.
How old is he?
You could argue that he's
5, isn't he?
You could argue, okay, there's a difference. One's in their 20s and one's in their 30s.
Yeah.
One's, you know, pretty much 1 foot into the retirement phase.
So there are a number of unanswered questions that I don't think the cricket community has fully thought through. One is that there is going to become a massive gulf between players who are signed to those franchises and those that aren't. So there's going to be more haves versus have-nots. That's already a problem in the international game. It will get worse in the domestic game. Your point, Adam, about who looks after the player in terms of their mental health and their retirement, you know, what happens with the inevitable post-career concussion issue if a player is contracted to multiple franchises as opposed to their county or international side, who looks after them if that becomes I very much doubt that there is an international fund set up by big franchises to look after players who suffer long-term mental or physical health issues as a result of concussion. the interests of, and I've said it before, the interests of those people running the big franchises is not aligned to the interests of the wider cricket community, right? By and large, they are very influential figures with a lot of money. They do not have, well, they have a seat at the table for that, but they are potentially conflicted in terms of their conflict of interest, and all of that points to a situation a bit like a bit like big football, where there is marginal interest in football at the European level, other than the Euro tournament, which happens every 4 years.
Yep.
The World Cup, and that's it. No other real friendly football exists. There's the Asian Champions tournament that Australia plays in, marginal. There are a few other tournaments that are played in, marginal. Like that, I think, is the road that we need to be prepared to head down. In the international cricket outside of World Cups will become marginalised, and I fear for the fact that Test cricket doesn't have a window to be able to do what it's able to do now, which is showcase international talent.
I want to argue with you that,
Cool.
It's not the beginning of the marginalisation of Test cricket. It's almost the continuation of the marginalisation
I would agree.
of Test cricket. Since the 80s, since we brought sort of one-day cricket kicked off, we're looking at within 60 years the extinction of Test cricket almost by 2040, that we play 2 tests a year or something like that in an international window. It really is just sort of phase 2, phase 3 of the progression of where this is going. And at the end of the day, when ratings, revenue, everything that sort of is king or queen, that's just where the game is going to go. And I think that it's going to be hard to stop that with us 4 on the podcast.
Well, exactly. And you look at that ICC revenue model that you
It's
looked
outrageous.
at. Yeah,
Absolutely outrageous.
It is outrageous. And I mean, but, so India, I think, gets 38% of the pie or something. But all the flip side of the other arguments that I've seen are that India generates way more than 38% of that money. So they could almost argue they're not getting enough. And you go down, people thought it was, we always talk about the big 3, but I think Australia and England, it's like 7% or...
England's 6.8 and Australia 6.2.
Yeah, whereas New Zealand's at 4.5 or 7 or something, and all the other nations are about there. The lesser ranked nations get slightly less and things. But
so the governance of cricket is in a poor state globally, right? Because as much as we malign US sports as being player driven and money oriented and all the rest of it, at least the collective bargaining agreements in those sports recognize big market versus small market and have revenue sharing models that approximate a fair distribution of TV revenue, which is effectively what this is, right? The vast majority of money made in cricket is through TV revenue by selling TV rights to Indian cricket, the IPL, Indian games, etc. So what is skewed here is the governance model for cricket globally does not have an adequate collective bargaining agreement across nations, because that's hard to organise, and it's even harder to organise when one party has all the money and all of the say. So I don't see there being an answer to this problem. And if all that's being served is commercial interests for a very, very few select group of people to harness cricket and use it to make even more money for commercial gain, like that, and I'm starting to sound a lot more... Which way am I leaning? I can't remember the left and the right ones. The one, the mummy government one. I'm starting to lean far towards to the left. Yes, right, fair enough. Further towards the left than I normally would. But that is a consideration that I think that we haven't really addressed in this. We're so obsessed with whether or not we haven't stopped to think if we should.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, you think about that model though, in terms of the revenue. There's just, there's no... You talked about the NBA. I think we might get to a situation where the players are looking at those models and going, actually, we're not getting enough.
Yes.
Because I think I saw some stat, I cannot remember any of it, but in terms of the percentage that the players get compared to... in the IPL compared to the NBA and all the other sports.
Yeah,
so it's very low.
Yeah,
I think they only get about 14.
The NBA's 50.5%, I think, goes to the players through that.
But they can dictate that in a franchise-based system.
Exactly.
Yes,
Exactly. If we do go to a franchise model, this might be awesome for the players the players might be, like you say, being on the spectrum of some of these global superstars where they're earning $40-50 million a year.
Yes, absolutely.
And if you're a player,
and
Jofra Archer on a Supermax.
and
but
you're thinking it's fantastic.
But again, to Bordy's point, I think that's where then the other things that you get from the way that the game currently runs, where you're contracted to your national board, you've got some support. England will be supporting 400 professional cricketers. Australia is supporting, I don't know how many people get state contracts, maybe 20 people get state contracts.
Yeah,
so you might have 120, 150 cricketers. That isn't going to be the case as we move forward if that is franchise driven.
Well, I read an article, and it makes more sense now around the timing of Kieran Pollard came out and talked about how the Mumbai Indians, helped him, looked after his body, got him the rehab he needed.
Yeah.
It was more of a slight against the, the West Indies Cricket Board, but it makes sense now that, they're trying to get this into the media, trying to push that.
Well, that's
that
a good thing.
infrastructure.
At least that those structures are in place to
and when we've
look
had
after
Bondi
players.
and James Pament on, they've talked about that the pastoral care of Mumbai Indians.
Well, they set up that
stuff.
infrastructure to operate 12 months a year, right? So that is a unequivocal. But there's going to be franchise tournaments where that isn't the case, where it is pay big money, get the people in, and then literally pack up the stand and don't bring it out again until the next year that the tournament's on, and that's the problem.
And there's a multi-jurisdictional issue as well, right? Like if you're contracted to a big franchise like that, and you're playing in multiple leagues around the world, and you get hurt, who's picking up the tab for your rehab? And those. The working conditions in each of those nations will be very different. How do you need to look after someone in terms of superannuation, and what happens after cricket, and all of those kinds of post-career things. Because yes, there's a lot of money on offer for the big guys, but if you're not in the IPL, what's the living for you playing cricket? What's that going to look like? And so all of those things are going to have to be navigated very, very carefully. And I really fear that they're not going to be considered in a holistic way. I think it's going to be purely commercial driven for those franchises to make a lot of money, which would be a sad outcome.
Well, I'll tell you what, we've talked for about 17 minutes and we're not going to come to a conclusion. Let's take an action.
A lot of employment chat on today's podcast.
County Championship.
We're going to go to the County Championship in a minute, but let's just say that we'll come back to this and we'll actually do some proper research.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get an algorithm going, and we'll have a decent chat about this in a future episode when there's no cricket going on.
I'm looking through your notes here, and you've missed actually the biggest story of the County Championship. But let's get into that.
Which one have I missed?
You've missed Rory Burns' hair.
Oh boy.
Okay.
That is the biggest story.
Have we got some kind of?
He looks like he's one of King Louis's musketeers. It is incredible.
Oh wow! So still long.
Halfway down the back long.
Oh wow! Okay.
That's an exaggeration, but very long.
I thought you were going to say he'd cut it off, and
it's not black either. It's a different colour. You need to have a look at this picture.
You're very excited about this, I can see.
I'm gonna let's segue though to someone at the opposite end of the hair spectrum. Daryl Mitchell has brought up 100 for Lancashire. Looked pretty good as well on the highlights.
Yeah,
It must have been pretty happy with that.
Oh mate, yeah. Look, I was thinking about him when I was watching those highlights. I think he's just a legit awesome player now.
Yeah.
There's that, you go through this time when you're watching someone and you think, okay, they're a handy cricketer, they've come in, they've taken their chance, done all that kind of stuff. And then you reach a point where this is just who he is. That he is a very consistent international performer who over the past 12 months, 18 months, 2 years is performing at an extremely high level. And if this is what we're going to get out of him, then we're at the point where we've got an unbelievable, player on our hands here for the next 2 or 3 years. And we talk about Conway and Williamson and all these other guys that always get the limelight. But if Mitchell and then Blundell as well can kind of become those two players that they've been in the past 12 months, this batting lineup is starting to look very, very good.
With Mitchell especially, you mentioned the word consistency, and that's actually the key. It's consistency across all kinds of situations. He's not just a fair weather cricketer. He's come in when we've been really on the back foot and sort of gotten us out of holes.
Yeah.
He's done it at World Cup semi-finals for the 2020. Look, he is consistent.
Well, this innings there, I think they were 50 for 3 or something that comes in. And I think first ball, he's just donked it over the bowler's head for 4 or 6 and just played with that positivity all the time. Yeah, it's awesome to watch. And yeah, like I said, he's a pretty good cricketer now.
Steve Smith, other end of the spectrum, struggling a little bit in the county championship. I think he's averaging 11 or something like that. the press are already starting to gear up. Ollie Robinson made a comment, I think, in the press that he'd noticed a couple of things of Smith in the nets, but he did then go on to say, and I'm sure he's noticed some things about my bowling that he'll be able to take advantage of. Of course, the headline is, Ollie Robinson's got Steve Smith on toast or something like that. Anything caught your eye, Baldy, in that? Are you concerned with, I guess, Smith's form?
No, not with Smith's form. I mean, he's going to average what he averages. I mean, you can set your own expectations and your own line on what you think he'll average. I've got mine, and I'll save it to the Ashes preview. But he is going to be who he is. I think the real interesting ones are the guys like Marcus Harris, guys on the fringe of test selection, how he's performing, how Cameron Bancroft's performing, how Michael Neser is performing for
really
Glamorgan.
Well.
So guys like that are the ones that I think are really interesting to me, because England have already said it. This Ashes series is most likely going to be, particularly for the bowlers, a squad game. England have got their own injury concerns. They'll probably have resolved themselves by the time the Ashes rolls around. But I think for Australia, they are not going to be able to just roll out Cummins, Hazelwood, Stark for every test. They're going to need to bring some other players in. It might be guys like Michael Neser. So they're the guys that I'm really looking at. The other thing that I'm really looking at as well is the top of the order for Australia. What are we going to get out of the opening partnership? Is it going to be a Harris or a Renshaw or someone like that coming in for Warner or Khawaja
After game 3 when Stuart Broad's dismissed David Warner from around the wicket
six times for 9 runs? Like that's a real concern, because by then the Ashes could be gone.
Well, I reckon that's the biggest question, is actually the top order, because you'd expect Australia to be able to take 20 wickets in England. But Smith basically put the team on his back in the last Ashes in 2019. What did he average in that? He was
lost 80 or 90.
Like, I don't think that he'll be able to pull that sort of
Herculean
effort out again. And it is about those peripherals. How's Marnus going? Who's going to open the batting? Those are the questions that are actually the biggest for Australia.
Yeah, and they're unanswered for me at the moment.
And we'll save those for the Ashes.
I think we will.
Ashes preview.
Open question on Foakes, Binksy. We've spent 57 and odd minutes not talking about wicket keeping. We've covered pretty much every other cricketer in the Indian squad, the Australian squad, the New Zealand squad, and the England squad, without talking about Foakes.
Yeah, so look, this is something that I'm literally Googling his name every morning at the moment. And look, unfortunately, my Google this morning came up with a scoop, an exclusive in the Daily Telegraph out of London, saying that there are sources close to the England setup that say that Bairstow is going to keep wicket through the course of the Ashes and be named in the squad for the test against Ireland, which is going to come out over the next 2 or 3 days. Obviously mentioned some other permutations. I've seen even Ben Stokes to open the batting with Ben Duckett and Crawley to get the heave-ho to allow them to play Bairstow and Foakes. And then obviously that the more obvious one, which would be that Bairstow might come in and open the batting and Foakes keeps the gloves. But it looks as if he despite averaging, I think, 60 odd, 40 odd, and a good 30 odd in that New Zealand series in his last 3 series, Ben Foakes is going to get the arse. The other thing to note as well, we talked a little bit about those bowling stocks a minute or two ago. Ollie Stone now out for 6 or 7 weeks. So to go alongside, obviously, the fact that it's looking unlikely that Jofra Archer is going to play much part in the English summer, it really only leaves England with Mark Wood of those, that real express trio. At this stage fit, so they're going to need to go into those sort of bowling depths. And Bryden Cass is the other one that they've talked about a little bit, and he's got a little niggle as well. So whilst it might not be rosy for David Warner and Australia at the top of the order, England not without their problems leading into June in that Test match against Ireland.
Doesn't sound like problems. Sounds like an embarrassment of riches.
Yeah.
Well, maybe. We'll come on to that on the Ashes preview show. But look, as you've alluded to, we've gone 57 minutes. So I think time to wrap up the podcast here. It's been good to talk IPL. We'll be back, of course, next week. A week deeper into the tournament, we'll be coming into the Pizzanator, the Dominator, and the Baconator. And we'll talk about the finals preview for the IPL, and then we'll be a little bit closer to that first Test match of the English summer as well, Ireland versus England at Lords. But for now, it is good night and God bless from us here at the Top Order Podcast. We'll see you very soon. Stay tuned. Good night.